Well, once again, thank you for joining me for this Bible study Wednesday evening. And still happy to be in the book of Nehemiah. Certainly one of my favorites. So much to learn about leadership, so much to learn about Christian living. And we are going to stay in Nehemiah chapter 10 this evening. And remember last week we had something of an overview of chapter 9 and 10. Looking at something of the spiritual vision that came about, revival if you like, we could call it, in the lives of the people, their commitment to be more committed to God. And so today I want to look at the first commitment that these people in Israel, Jerusalem, make on this particular occasion. It's verse 30, and we will have a look at that just in a minute. But I just want to remind you again that there had been something unusual that was taking place during this season under Nehemiah's leadership, the building of the wall, the completing of the wall, the people calling for the bringing of the book and the exposition of the book and the understanding of God's word to them. And what followed, the work of the Spirit in stirring in their hearts, doing something significant going forward. Well, they made a resolution in verse 29 of chapter 10 to walk in God's law that was given by Moses, the servant of God, to observe all and do all the commandments of the Lord and his rules and his statutes. In other words, they're saying we want to go forward in obedience to God. We want to submit to the will of God. Well, there's a whole list of commands, ordinances, and statutes that they could have selected, and I'm no doubt that these would have been in the context on their minds. But nevertheless, of all the commands that they could have specified, very first on the list, they choose to identify, and listen to this, no longer resolve to place the family at risk. Verse 30, we will not give our daughters to the peoples of the land or take their daughters for our sons. Now, that verse taken in isolation certainly could be seen to have racist intention, which is not at all the case. If it was misunderstood or misinterpreted, it could be said that this was to preserve their ethnic identity and their superiority as a Jewish nation. That's not the intention or the motive at all. It's not discrimination that is the issue. The resolve is to no longer allow intermarriage with the pagans. It's in submission to God's wisdom concerning their vulnerability, concerning destructive influences from other religions that in turn would trigger the anger of God. So if we go back to Deuteronomy 7 verse 3, you shall not intermarry with them, these are the foreign nations, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. Then he gives the reason. For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you and would destroy you quickly. Now that of course is then. We do need to bring this to our own context today. We too have to stand up to the challenge of avoiding destructive, godless influences on our families. And so I want to go back, and my very first point is going to be, well, what is it about the family that we need to protect? Now, just to remind you of something we South Africans know a lot about, is going to all the trouble, all the expense to put walls around our houses, fences, electric fences, beams, infrared beams, response alarm systems, and to ask the question, why would we go to all this elaborate equipment and expense? Well, the reason is simply that you want to protect what you consider to be important and precious, that which is belonging to you. So surely then, to a much greater extent, we need to understand to protect that which is important and precious to God. And so the point is, the family is precious to God. The family is God's idea. And we go back right to the beginning of the Bible. The family has its roots in the work of creation. We find in Genesis 2:7, the Lord God formed the man and from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now it was God. It was God who saw that this man Adam needed a partner, a helpmeet. He made Eve and he brought her to Adam, and he said in chapter 2 and verse 18 of Genesis, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And it was God, as Jesus pointed out in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 4, who ordained the physical relationship, the one flesh union, the reality of a marriage being consummated, that there is a covenant between a natural man and a natural woman that brings about this beautiful relationship of a marriage. This is what Jesus says in that chapter, Matthew 19. Haven't you read? He replied. At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. There's so much more that can be said. We go back to the 10 Commandments, and there we have no uncertain terms regarding sexual purity within the confines of marriage. You shall not commit adultery. In other words, you need to be faithful to your wife. You need to be faithful to your husband. Sex is a blessing, a gift from God, and so to be practiced within the context of this one flesh union. And then we add children into the mix, and we see it was God who insisted that there be order in the family. Children were to honor their parents. Again, Exodus chapter 20 verse 12. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So you get the point. We're saying here we want to protect the family. Why do we want to protect the family? It's simply because the family is God's design. It's God's idea. It's what God ordained and brought about in terms of husband being a father, and at least a man being a husband and a father, a woman, a wife and a mother, and the children to honor and respect and obey their parents. So that really is something we must not forget. Remember that the family is God's idea. Then I want to add something else, and this really comes through in the New Testament, is that the family is God's visual aid. If we go to Ephesians chapter 5, and God here describes something about the functioning and the purpose of the family. He explains some of the role that a husband will fulfill and the wife will fulfill. And I want to read especially verse 29 of chapter 5. No one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. Now you see there's a comparison, there's an analogy here. The marriage is an analogy of the relationship of Christ and the church. Because we are members of his body, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. What is God saying? What is this mystery actually revealing? Well, Paul says that he's referring to Christ and the church, because when we look at a Christian marriage, one that operates on the basis of God's design and God's instructions, what do we see? Well, husbands are to love their wives as Christ loved the church, verse 25. Now that's not normal. That's not going to happen in the everyday event of just families all over the world apart and outside of a relationship with God. But it's not as an end in itself. There is in that a demonstration for people to see, here is something unusual. Here is something that is showing us, giving us a picture of, giving us a visual aid of the way that Christ loves the church. The same way a wife, in the way that she submits and respects. And the relationship is one of unity, concern for each other, What is it that the husband needs? What is it that the wife needs? And so there is this mutual interest in each other. Now, we can look around the church, and I wonder at Central if you can identify families where there's this unusual functioning, where it is obvious that the husband loves the wife as Christ loved the church. There's a willingness to be sacrificial. There's a willingness to serve her best spiritual interests. The wife in return is honoring her husband and respecting her husband, whereas the natural sinful nature is to be preoccupied with self. A husband saying, I want to do it my way. A wife saying she wants to do it her way. And no, the visual aid that comes across. And so there's this relationship, marriage designed to be a reflection of the saving love of God that we have been provided for in Jesus Christ. And that raises a challenge to those who are married. Marriage ought to be taken seriously, and husbands and wives ought to consider their particular pattern and style that has been revealed, not putting any obstacles in the way of others that look onto this and are supposed to see the visual aid of the gospel. Well, for the Jews in Nehemiah's day, the danger was distracting and destructive influence of false religion. That can happen to us today. So I want to move on now to another point. I want us to identify the distracting and destructive influences. And now this is more application for us. How do we safeguard our families? Well, we need to be aware of the dangers, the enemy. And so perhaps to make the statement, ignorance is not bliss. The flood of ungodly influence on our families, on our children, on us adults is huge. And I've got a couple over here. The big one today, of course, is pressure to redefine the family. I've quoted this comedian. I don't like what he says, where he stands. But Chris Rock asks the question, do you want to be single and lonely, or married and bored? You see the godless perspective. Many children have become disillusioned, sadly, because of what they've observed in their parents, the role models that their parents have supposed to have been, they simply just haven't been. And so they believe the sentiment of a Chris Rock that, well, singleness is not great, marriage is not great, so what are we going to do? And so many then aim something in the middle, sort of have your cake, or they think they can have their cake and eat it. Sexual encounters, cohabitation, and in fact it's a statistical fact and that cohabitation has grown exponentially over the last 30 years. It's soaring today, and sadly the US is where we get our statistics. More than half of all people live together before getting married. I find that in the church, not as frequent as that, but from time to time, and when I've raised it with the couple, they're quite offended. They don't see that this is in fact defying the very nature of God. And so there's this significant shift in our culture. Now remember, we're looking at the influence that's coming in, that can come in and destroy our families. The culture today is wanting to redefine marriage. John Vitter, and I quote him, he says, marriage is as a permanent contractual union designed for the sake of mutual love, procreation and protection, is slowly giving way to a new reality of marriage as a terminal sexual contract. In other words, while it lasts, good and well, designed for the gratification of individual parties. So the attitude is, what can I get? And not so, as Jesus teaches us himself, what can I give? And so this added into a context where sociologists are saying that marriage is simply a social construct and does change, should change from time to time. Political correctness, sometimes our children, not only sometimes, sadly our children through the education department are being indoctrinated to redefine marriage to be between a man and a woman and a woman. No. Marriage is between a natural man and a natural woman. And what happens is, of course, what Paul was already saying in Romans chapter 1, the world exchanging the truth of God for a lie and worshipping the creature rather than the Creator. It is said today that sex is nothing more than a biological impulse. It's a desire that must just simply be satisfied regardless of whatever you do or whoever you like, as long as there's mutual consent. And so those with heterosexual tendencies pursue relationships before marriage and outside of marriage. The whole LGBTQ plus movement has had a huge influence in South Africa. For some reason, our political leaders have adopted this modification of the family. Homosexual orientation and preferences have just become acceptable and everyday. Family then has become whatever you want it to be, whatever you define it to be. The pressure is on to redefine the family. I want to add another pressure. I've called it the strong appeal of so much that is nothing. Illustration, I remember my dad, heart attack at 40, major cholesterol issues, and never ever stopped dipping a piece of bread into the fat remaining in a pan after something was fried. And why would he do that? You see, it's a short-term gratification. Well, it tastes so good. There's a long-term disaster. And so we need to be careful of that kind of thinking in terms of our spiritual well-being, and particularly regarding our families. Many people suffer because they say they can't say no to a nice slice of cake, forgetting that this nice slice of cake with the cream and sugar and all the rest of it will have consequences on their health going forward. And so Nehemiah and the people of his day found false gods, foreign gods, and their ways at times appealing and attractive. No, we don't turn bits of wood and chip pieces of stone and put them on our mantelpiece and worship them. That's not the kind of idolatry we see today. However, it's worth noting that we can place the family at risk for the sake of pursuing what I've called nothing. In other words, temporal gain. Isaiah 37:19, and they've cast their gods into the fire, for there were no gods, and the work of men's hands wood and stone. Well, that's then. But what is it today? What is it that looks so appealing? What is it that satisfies the self-indulgent nature of men and women? I have a list here, and in and of themselves, some of it in its right place is important and necessary, but it's when it becomes an idol, when it becomes a god, when it becomes a preoccupation, accumulating stuff that moth and rust destroy. Jesus made that comment about investing in that which is nothing instead of that which is forever. It can be a reputation to impress men and women around us, but grieves God. It could be experiences, just looking for those momentary thrills that just suddenly disappear. Excessive physical exercise can be an idol, can be a god. And children are watching this. People are watching this. What are we communicating to our family in that which we give priority, that which we give emphasis and prominence? Solomon learned and told us in Ecclesiastes 2 verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, from my heart found no pleasure in all my toil, and this was a reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. There's another challenge. It's the challenge of pluralism and relativism, and I'll just touch on these quite briefly at this point in time. Pluralism promotes a view that claims the rightness and acceptance of the full spectrum of different views and religion. In other words, all roads lead to God. All religions lead to God. And pluralism promotes the tolerance of all who agree that every religion, whether it be Islam, whether it be Buddhism, whether it be Christianity, each have equal value. You must be tolerant with each other. However, they themselves will be intolerant to any who claim a singular way. For example, those of us who accept the words of Jesus that He is the way, the truth, and the life. Children are being influenced. Perhaps you've been influenced as an adult listening to this today by just be patient. It doesn't matter if your neighbor does not accept Jesus, as long as they have a particular view that leads them to a more or less moral type of life. No. It's not right. Relativism is from the same family as pluralism. It's denying any form of absolute truth. It points out to people that you can have your view and I can have my view, and there can be different views, and we just carry on regardless. And so pluralism and relativism undermine the need for Christ. Why would Jesus, Philippians chapter 2, did not consider equality with God something to be held on to, but took on human flesh? Why would He go to that extent? Why would He go to the extent of being humiliated on the cross? Why would He be willing to be subjected to the wrath of God, to the point of my God, why have you forsaken? Why that if relativism and pluralism and any other religion will do? It's Christ and Christ alone. But you need to know the media, certainly the television, will criticize, will undermine the Christian gospel, which is exclusive, and will promote the broader views of pluralism and relativism. I have one last point, and there's a couple of, I hope, some practical points to leave with you. How can you protect your family? Well, there are a couple of things we can consider, and the first is you resolve to wear the sword and use it. Now, what do I mean by that? God has given to us a description of spiritual armor, and it's no news to anybody here that the sword is a description of the Bible. Dear friends, I want to urge you, even those of us who are Baptists and at a church where we say we value the Scriptures, we read the Scriptures, we teach the Scriptures, we preach the Scriptures, but do we know the Scriptures? You see, resolving to wear the sword and use it in your family, in your own life, in the context of conversation with others. Deuteronomy 6:6, and these words I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. Are you teaching? Now this is, of course, Israel and Moses speaking to them, but we have a far greater revelation, the Old and the New Testament. Are you teaching it diligently to your children? And you shall talk of them when you sit at your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. When you get home on a Sunday after a morning service, to talk about the message and the reading, and talk about life and and how God is at work, and all the beauty that surrounds us that God has made, and the challenges that are being raised against God. And so I would encourage you, resolve to wear the sword and use it. Number two, and this is especially a challenge to marriages, people who are married, husbands and wives, live your life in your marriage and project the gospel. There's a challenge there. Or is it all about self? Is it that the world revolves around you, that everything is about you as a husband or you as a wife? Do others see that you are a husband that sacrificially loves and serves the spiritual well-being of your wife? Are you a wife that seeks to honor your husband and not undermine him and disrespect him? Communicating to your children, if there's something wrong in our home. The best gift, and I've said this many times, the best gift we can give to our children is to demonstrate the gospel in our marriage and family. I've added here, resolve to not bury your head in the sand. You can't ignore the reality. Times are tough. There's a lot of pressure, and there always has been, by the way. It kind of ebbs and flows, but the antagonism against Christ and the gospel is something that is real. And then I added this last statement, and resolve to pray for your family like never before, for their salvation, for their protection, for their spouses, for their children, for their spiritual growth and maturity, for their sanctification, to resist the evil one, to stand firm, to take on the reality of honoring the Lord in all of their lives. And so bless you. And then as we continue, just a couple of questions over here. I don't have the questions for some reason. They've disappeared off my screen. And so I do apologize for that, but I'm sure there is a lot that one can discuss if you are in a group.